welcome to the extended Q&A of the second day of our workshop on cognitivism and the arts. Please, Iris.
So thank you both. I was just thinking during the lunch break that how do you know that you are at a wonderful philosophical event? Because the only thing you want to do is keep talking to people and then go home and write your paper. So that's precisely what this event has done for me, so thank you so much. It was a great pleasure to listen to both of you, and I'm really inspired by both talks that you gave. And I'm always so intrigued by this relation that I feel exists between Collingwood and Kant. And to be hearing the two of your talks, one after the other, one inspired and focused on Kant, and the other one so nicely dedicated to the whole of Collingwood's system. I think it was very nice how you really made sure to bring our attention to the fact how different works that he has connect and how they combine to come up with a theory that you very nicely presented. So what I want to start with is I have some, not concerns, but just maybe questions of clarification with respect to Monica, and I just want to check on certain things with respect to whether I understood David's talk on Collingwood. So Monica, what I'm most intrigued by, because I haven't done this aspect of Kant's theory, I think you're absolutely right, and I think I really like the way in which you unite his formalism, his cognitivism. I've been interested in exploring this line with respect to poetry, but I've never done it with respect to visual art, and I think you really point to something that is deeply interesting and that really deserves more attention from cognitivists such as myself, who try to show that his theory is deeply concerned with cognitive value. But I want to go back to something that you mentioned more towards the beginning, when you were talking about the fact that for Kant, pure judgments of taste are propositions which can have true value. And I'm wondering whether we could claim that when someone makes a faulty, if that's the word, or erroneous judgment of taste, does it mean that if we are to rebuke this person, would that imply that it is actually the conditions that this person is in when making the statement are in fact wrong? So for example, I think I'm disinterested, but in fact I do have an interest towards an object, in which case it would be that I'm kind of not so much perhaps confused with respect to the object, but I'm more confused with respect to my own state of being, in the sense that I may be lacking an introspection into my own kind of states with respect to what is happening to me. And I also find it curious when you mentioned at one point that it is the pure judgment of taste that is propositional, and that kind of has to do with this state where I have to be absolutely certain that I'm disinterested. And I wonder how much of that can actually be applied to adherent beauty. Because it seems that with adherent beauty, there's much more that we can, for example, if you make a faulty judgment of adherent beauty, maybe part of the reason why the judgment is wrong is because, for example, I fail to recognize the relevant category. I think this is a free verse when in fact it's not. I think this is not a sonnet when in fact it is, or that this is a psychological novel. So it seems to me that there are more facts of the matter that we can actually check and then be kind of certain whether or not we are making the right sort of judgments or not. And with respect to David, I don't know if you want all the questions. Should they go with all the questions, or should we just?
I think perhaps one by one would be more.
Okay, so I can answer. There are at least two questions, right? So the first one, of course, that your state of mind is not completely transparent to you, according to Kant. That is mentalism. So that is, you never know whether there is basically, for a free beauty, pure judgments of taste, there is only one condition you have to satisfy, and that is disinterestedness. So, and interests, various of them, they can be related to physical pleasure or also intellectual interest, cognitive interest. We can or they can be very sophisticated. Snobism is also kind of interest. So you have a painting on your wall just for the sake of your friends, to be sophisticated, to have sophisticated taste. There is also interest, different, and maybe sometimes you're not aware of them, and often you're not aware of them. And self-deception as well here works. So it is what is paradoxical here, that even though conditions are satisfied, basically this one, because the second one, what is the second condition for universal validity of judgments of taste? The fact that is in the 9th paragraph, so-called key of the judgment of taste, where he introduces free play between understanding and imagination. That is his description of aesthetic judging. That is the second, and he thinks that all of us, all human beings, we have the same cognitive structure. We are cognitively uniform. So that is another premise for universal validity of the judgments of taste. Basically, that's all, unfortunately. And as they understand 4 moments of the judgment of taste, first is the first premise, second is the second premise, fourth, the last one, is only emphasizing the second one, necessary, valid. And the third one, what is the third one? He's talking about the object. It's a bit strange. I think that he realized that his argument is not sufficient, that he has to talk about object in order to explain that discrepancy between his anti-realism and his meta-aesthetical cognitivism. He has to say something about the object, and he was afraid because he didn't, and now he is telling more than he needs about the very shapes and how shapes should be, etc. So the paradox is that even though judgments of taste are universally valid, we never know which one is real judgment of taste, which one is valid. If you say this is beautiful and I say this is not beautiful, we don't have some external criteria. That would be general problem of mentalism, the problem of private language, if you want to, from philosophical investigations. So criteria should be external, but we don't have that for Kant. As to the second question, so adherent beauty, it's a completely different thing, because now he combines, it's partly intellectual and partly inferential. Maybe it's not inferential, but it's like categories of art. Some from Kendall Bolton, right? Just to apply to evaluation. So you should know what is the right category here. And there are some standards of genres, and you have to know that this is lyrical ballad, for example, in order to understand that it has to be expression of emotion or spontaneous expression of emotion. So it's different, but I don't know what is the role of pre-play of imagination and understanding here, or it's completely different way of judging. I think that we always need that acquaintance, but it's not developed. And also, difference between free beauty and adherent beauty is so relative. If you're an ornithologist, that exotic bird, wouldn't be exotic for you. So that would be, adherent beauty for you. And for me, because I'm not in that terminology, my conceptual register is different, and I don't know anything about it. For me, that is free beauty. So it's a bit
It's
relative.
interesting that if you read people like Arnold Carlson and his idea about environmental aesthetics, everything becomes adherent beauty. There's no pure beauty, or at least it's very hard to find examples of pure beauty there.
And the main example, Rose, Is it free or adherent? We
Yeah.
know a lot of things ordinary about roses.
Yeah.
And it's not exotic anymore because of cognitive content we
Yeah.
relates to this.
And at least for some properties, you imagine, you look at your cat. This is an Eddie Zemek example. You look at your cat. It's so fluffy, so cute, so whatever.
Eddie Zemek?
Eddie Zemek.
Oh, okay.
So,
Oh, I thought you said anti-Semitic. Okay.
Eddie.
Yeah, Zemek, yeah. That's better.
So, if you do this imaginative effort of looking at your cat as what was this expression? A swollen reptile, something like that. A disfigured reptile. You could do that. If you can put yourself in a position,
Or Sfinga.
change the cat.
Sfinga.
Yeah, it's all of a sudden it's sinister, like the change. So you need to know what it is. Okay, maybe knowing that the flower is the sexual organ of the plant plays no role in your experience of grace, delicacy, whatever. I was saying, okay, it depends on the category, whether or not I experience elegance in it. But elegance itself doesn't seem to depend on. I mean, it's like, okay, the criteria for obscenity have changed from the Victorian age to nowadays, but what it is like to, I'm being shocked with the obscene, that really doesn't, does it change?
Modest formalism.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking about that. I don't know if it was a rule. And I'm getting lost, so please interrupt me.
So what was the question?
I don't remember.
Okay, I interrupted you, so
No.
I just had association. An
I was
example.
going to do that. Yeah, I was putting my finger on the issue of how disinterested is the judgment of beauty about the flower or the Alan Carlson thing. It's all about it's dependent beauty, adult beauty all the way down.
Because there is no innocent eye
Because
after
can you
all.
get rid of concepts to that extent?
You are always using,
Yeah.
and that is without concept, an object of universal liking. We should not understand that quite literally, because when I say X is beautiful, for example, rose is beautiful, I'm obviously using concepts, at least two of them, the concept of rose and the concept of beauty. The thing is that I'm not inferring, it's non-inferential, that's all. Of course. So you're questioning disinterestedness as a condition.
Yeah.
What?
So I don't question disinterest, for instance. Eddie Zemek attacked disinterest in many ways that I find misguided. I think, okay, what does it mean for the judgment itself to be disinterested? It's not dependent on the satisfaction of my current desires. For instance, I look at the canteen of water, I'm really thirsty. What a beautiful canteen of water. What a beautiful play in cards. I'm going to play, you know what I mean? It's a Chinese example. So there's a connection to my current desires. So I often find myself, I'm looking at what, we all know Real Beauty by Eddie Zemek,
Yes, of course.
the very text where he questions the disinterestedness. And okay, but for all this you say about desire, and using desire to explain all those aesthetic properties are tertiary properties because they are mediated by desire, etc. Everything you say is compatible with disinterestedness. Because, okay, my judgment that the thing is such and such in this manner, it's not dependent on any on the satisfaction of my current desires. It's for that there is some conceptual connection with desire.
Good question.
It doesn't change it doesn't impugn or annul the fact that it is disinterested. So disinterestedness is really the achievement of that independence from our current desires. But having said that, there's also
not just desires, but knowledge as well. Intellectual interest, moral, also moral. He thought that this is differential specific of judgments of taste. So even moral interests are not welcome. So it's controversial. Everything should be. We should abstract from everything. It's not very plausible. You know what is enlightening here? So situations in which you judge that something is good, artistically, aesthetically good, but still don't like it. So it's a kind of weakness. I would say that this is weakness of taste. So, or not, or you're just objective, so to say, you're just, there is a neutral position. For example, I can say Ivo Andrić is an excellent writer, just excellent Serbian writer, but generally speaking, but it's not my cup of tea. But I can realize that he's good, even though it's not my cup of tea. I mean, there is a lot of works of art for everyone tastes, right? I don't have to be a fan of Ivo Andrić. So that is the perfect situation in which we can say that you are not under the influence of some interest, because your interest is quite opposite, or a situation, opposite situation, in which it's very different phenomenologically and cognitively. Situation in which you judge, so negative judgment of taste. If there is positive judgment of taste, there could be negative judgment of taste. This is ugly, or this is bad work of art. But still, so you judge. When you come home, you watch exactly this TV show or reality TV, or, you know, akrasia, like aesthetic akrasia. And those situations, when you have that discrepancy, are clear examples when interests go to one direction and judgment to the other.
Yeah, but in the case where you know, okay, Noel Carroll's different two notions of appreciation. Like
yes,
appreciation
objective and subjective.
And sizing it up. And then there is these cases where your sizing it up differs or diverges from your liking it. But you know that Ivo Andrić is better than that other.
I don't like, by the way, I don't like that Noel Carroll, some criticism where he makes difference between subjective and objective value. It's not answering the question, it's just refusing to answer. And what is subjective? He said subjective value is something related to my feeling, my aesthetic experience, and objective is like adherent beauty or categories. So this is not a solution, if you ask me.
Did you say that? Oh, sorry.
No.
Okay,
I'm talking enough.
Yeah, did you say that something like if there's a discrepancy between, so say you judge something is a good work of art, but you don't like it, it's not your taste. Did you say that was a weakness of taste?
I would say.
Okay, so do you think
it's like a weakness of will, maybe.
So
Yeah. Smell
okay, that's what I thought you said. So do you think that there's some normative force to judging something as bad, good or bad as art? There's almost like a normative entailment that you ought to also like it or dislike it if it's bad. Like
So what is the mechanism?
your preference or
So,
taste, not in the concept, like what we would say taste now. Like sort of like what you like, that your preferences, that there's some normative force that they should align with your judgment of
maybe
what
that
is
is aesthetic rationality,
good or
or-
bad. But then,
or not. So,
Right.
how does it function from the 9th paragraph? So first, of course, everything begins with the perception, the intuition. I have to, in order to say that this is beautiful, this is not beautiful, but something else, that the painting is beautiful. I have to see it, that is. And after that, I whether I should apply category of or not, sometimes I have, sometimes I don't have to apply category. But it starts with some, in my mind, free play between understanding and imagination. And I will, in my second presentation, I will try to explain what it is that free play between understanding and imagination. But result is, that is the sequence of mental acts or mental processes. The result is that disinterested pleasure. And maybe this disinterested pleasure, maybe it has some specific qualia. But this is also mentalism. so we don't have a measure for something that is internal. But why I say this is beautiful? Because I feel there's this disinterested pleasure. So how is it then possible not to like this? To say it's not my cup of tea, but it happens.
If Kant separates judgments of taste in his sense
Yes.
from what he calls judgments of agreeability,
Yes.
which is more like what colloquially most people would call taste today.
Yes.
But taste is what he meant by agreeability. If he separates the two, then why would there be that connection of entailment between? So if you judge something as a matter of taste to be good, why should you find it agreeable if taste and agreeability are
Different.
two separate things? Yeah, why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't you say no when you're dealing with art seriously? Judgments of taste are enough to get correct, and it doesn't even really matter if you happen subjectively to enjoy it or not, as long as you're making a correct judgment of taste. Why isn't that enough?
Maybe it's enough. We don't have anything about that in Kant's aesthetics, but still we have those maxims of common human understanding in the third critique. He's talking about where he talks about consistency of thinking. Maybe it's inconsistent to like what you judge aesthetically worthless. At least that, because they're in the situation of aesthetic acrasia, discrepancies, gap is bigger, right, than in the case of what I call weakness of taste. And also there is that imperfect duty for developing your talents, from the groundworks of metaphysics of morals. So maybe if you constantly, that is just one case, one occasion, but if you constantly watching reality TV, and it's maybe
Actually, sorry, but he does have in paragraph 52 this, I think, one of the most powerful descriptions of the bad influence of bad art, when he says that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, when he said, I mean, most people read that
I
paragraph
neglected that.
thinking this is what shows that he's a formalist, because he says in all works of art what is really important is the form. But then he continues and he says, because unless you have a good work of art, it will touch your spirit and it will make you feel dull, it will make you feel counterpropulsive, but worst of all, it will make you search for the same kind of experience. So I think this is a really wonderful way in which Kant was so aware that if you start binging on bad television or bad novels or bad, cheap romances or reality TV, that it will, and pardon my colloquialism, but that it will make you stupid. And that you are dissatisfied, that the main aspect of our engagement with bad art is that at some level you are aware that this is counterpropulsive to your intellectual capacities, but at the same time you can't help yourself. And I think this is a really wonderful analogy with eating bad food, right? You get addicted to sugar, but you know it's bad and you can't help yourself. So it's bad for your body in the same way in which bad art can be bad for your taste. So I think he was very well aware of this, of how easy it is for people to go into intellectually less demanding, because the criteria of good art is that it relates you to the moral ideas. That's kind of the paragraph 52. It relates you to the moral
aesthetic
ideas.
cognitivism again would be the answer. Yeah,
Exactly.
Thank you for that. I forgot about that.
But I really think it shows. I mean, with those people who just, who only read like lame, cheap romances or very silly detective novels where there's like no cognitive content whatsoever. And you really, for me at least, I think there is a way in which you see that they're just not fulfilling the potential that they could be, both with respect to art, both with respect to themselves. So I think Kant was very well aware of the fact that we do get, Rita Felsky has this notion of hooked on particular works, and he was very conscious that if you get hooked to the wrong kind of artworks, it will demolish you, it will harm you in a way. There is a way in which
Yes, that's when I said, I just said that he didn't talk about aesthetic acrasia. straightforward.
Yeah. But it is there.
But it's their cognitive and that is very relevant for this question. Thank you for that very much.
Yeah, I think
Because I need it for another
for another
occasion.
Yeah, it's 52nd paragraph. I think one of the most important paragraphs in the entire part of the art. But everyone reads it only to the extent that it supports pure formalism,
Yes, because of that.
ignoring these other elements.
Can I follow with something?
Yeah, of course.
So, as far as I can tell, the way that Kant talks about the need for a priori elements, which is like the moment and everything that has to do with his interestedness, so I'm partly following up on this, is he wants to make sure that there are no a posteriori elements, right? Those who mess up the universal validity. If I'm interested in some way, even though I may not know that I'm interested, but it would spoil, as he says, my judgment. So can we extend this thinking of what is the importance of a priori elements cognitively when making judgments of taste and when thinking about art? So when you talk about formalism, you talk about shapes, for instance, versus talk about colors, you'd say that's because my form of intuition, which pertains to space, is something that is a priori, right? So this is where it's important. So if we do it with, say, categories, and we talk about recognition of causality, so an a priori order of events in time, could that then be used to say that for Kant, elements in a story would be recognizable as being properly placed or beautiful or whatever, so we render more specific aesthetic judgments based on those cognitive structures that say, well, if things happen in order, if they are motivated properly, if they are logical, if characters' motivations are as they should be within this order, instead of, let's say, things happening out of place or something is unmotivated or causes do not lead to expected effects, then I could use those kinds of structures to assess that this work of art is somewhat deficient. Is that something that you think could be expanded from what you were saying to some other elements of assessing art?
Maybe.
That was a dramatic way.
Sure. I mean,
So these elements would be a priori elements.
they would be a priori cognitively because they are pertaining to categories, the way this pertains to intuition of space. I mean, it's on the same spectrum of a priori elements that Kant cognitively identifies. It identifies as cognitive capacity. So they do not contain a posteriori elements, as far as he's considering that. But they can play a role within a narrative, for instance, logical sequence of events,
So
actions, etc.
you count as a priori element everything which pertains to structure.
For instance, I'm following his identification of a priori elements in recognition. Intuition of space, intuition of time, categories that are transcendental. So
When you have judgment of space, there should be a posteriori element always, because everything it is by acquaintance. Everything starts with intuition, so we cannot skip that. Just the motivation for his attitude towards colors and shapes, but there is always an a posteriori element in it.
So what's the a posteriori and what?
In aesthetic judgment,
Yeah, that's necessarily there.
well, it is by acquaintance, right?
Wouldn't
And
so maybe this is a
starts
totally
with
wrong.
intuition.
Yeah, maybe this is a totally like mistaken, naive question of Kant. But why wouldn't that count as what he calls synthetic a priori? Why wouldn't the synthetic part do the work? Because it's coming from acquaintance and like it's not coming from experience in the sense that I thought a posteriori had to come from experience.
And also, I said that I say that it's beautiful because I have I'm in such mental state. What is determining ground of this judgment is disinterested pleasure that is a posteriori. So something is a priori, something is a posteriori. So what is here a priori at the end?
But for him, it's the expectation of pleasure for everyone.
Yes, that implication.
Yeah.
But does it precede judgment of taste, or it's
Cases, judgment itself.
It's kind of when you are making the judgment, you simultaneously expect and demand that everyone else will, and that's the a priori element of the judgment of taste.
yes, that could be one a priori element, but I'm not
No,
sure.
that is, that's precisely what Kant
Yeah.
says. That's the a priori
That's the
element in the judgment of taste.
Expectation of normativity is
Expectation of
the priori, is the a priori element.
Yes, and the demand of it. That's the second and the fourth mode. Can I go back to something that you mentioned with respect to form, colors?
Okay.
So I was wondering, I think you kind of talked about it, but I was wondering whether you could extend a little bit. When you talk about the priority that Kant gives to shape over colors, did I understand you correctly that part of the reason why that may be so is because the shapes are more directly related to the form and, of course, the purposiveness without the third element, right? So in that sense, would it be that shapes are kind of what enables the aesthetic judgment more quickly or more readily so than the colors themselves?
Probably, according to his view. I
Yeah.
think when you think about artworks, counterfactual. So I'm standing in front of that beautiful painting there, rooftops, windmill, Amadeo painting. So I can think, among other things, I can think about it counterfactually. What if this color
Rather than that.
was a little bit more pale or brighter? What if these lines were a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right? Without those elements, it would be better. Or if he added some elements, it would be better. So when I think about this, I think that shapes and colors are the same, equally important, really. So he has some reasons, or we can invent some reasons, reconstruct some arguments from his transcendental aesthetics, but formal purposiveness, as I understand it, is something very abstract. It's just the power of all of that, all works of art are organic wholes at the end. So all of that, unity of form and matter and the content, all of that elicit that free play, I think.
In that example, if you're judging, like if you're looking at a painting, like that one of the windmills on the rooftops, and you're thinking, as you said, that, you know, it would be better if this color were, or if you were brighter or darker, if this was a different color here, or even if you're making a counterfactual judgment and realizing that, no, the painting would be worse if this object was colored differently than it is, then it doesn't seem like that is the sort of response to colors that Kant is worried about as being too subjectively tainted, because that doesn't seem to have anything to do with whether you personally like one color better than the other. Isn't the judgment there that in the context of the painting overall, it fits better or it doesn't? So that seems to be almost a formal judgment about colors, and you're not saying what you personally feel or like or prefer about the colors. So that would still seem to count as formal, even though it's dealing with
Yes,
colors.
of course, in some
does
broader
that-
sense.
Yeah, but would Kant not agree with that? Like, I'm wondering if, like, when he talks about colors, if he's just thinking about preferring one color to another,
Yeah.
would he really discount colors totally from
Yes,
being a
he
formal
has
element?
several remarks. First, he said colors in general are aesthetically bad, so to say. Not just irrelevant, but they can even spoil our judgment. That is general colors.
They
as
can.
such.
If they
But-
can, if people
and
bring in
then-
their subjective taste to, like, looking at the Amadeo painting and like thinking, like looking at it in terms of whether you like the colors that are in it or not, then they could spoil the painting. So is that, like, if that's what he's worried about, his statements to that effect might not be entirely ruling out some role that color could play
Yes,
in
there
form.
is a role to emphasizing shapes, drawing, but
You can even make an analogy with taste. If you say, consider ice cream. Some people say, I really like raspberry.
yes.
But I may very well acknowledge that, look, if you take a fresh flavor, really fresh flavor like lemon, and then you combine it with an earthy flavor like cinnamon, this is a better combination, a better contrast than just putting raspberry with lemon or raspberry with whatever, see? And all the while, I just prefer the raspberry. So, but it's,
Yeah, that's a good
there's a
example.
structural element to this. Like,
Yes.
Okay, fresh with earthy makes more sense in
Mhm.
terms of functioning as a
And that seems more like a detached or disinterested judgment of form in some
Yeah, you
sense.
can grasp that,
Mhm.
even if you. I still prefer that other flavor. But,
Yes, there is one remark in the Blue Book, Wittgenstein's, I think it's Blue Book, when he said properties are not ingredients, but here this seems relevant because we always should have on our mind that artworks are organic wholes at the end. So
exactly.
he didn't like colors,
That's what strikes me.
especially
Yeah.
compound colors. So
When you ask what's better, like,
I
I
think
was-
it's arbitrary.
when you were explaining that part of our polka dots better than stripes, and I was thinking about that discussion. Are minor chords sad? Like, actually, they're not sad at all. It depends on the context. So, what I could provide, even in music, you have this phenomenon in harmony, like the same interval can be two different things in different syntactic contexts. Depends on, you gotta grasp the content. So, it's it's a silly question.
Yes,
Whether
that's why-
polka dots are better than stripes or the other way around.
It's obviously the other way around. The stripes are better, obviously.
So you mentioned Ted Cohen,
Yeah. Sorry?
Ted Cohen, and his idea about lines, graceful lines. So
Ted
it's
Cohen.
silly to say
Ted
that
Cohen
a
responds
line
to-
can be
yeah.
graceful. It cannot be great as it is. It should be something complex
Yeah.
to be graceful.
It's like just a monochromatic canvas of a very light blue, and you would call that gaudy or whatever, if I'm pronouncing it right, like a gris. There's something missing there.
So Kant liked wallpaper. Like, I remember one of his examples is wallpaper as an example of pure formal beauty. The designs in wallpaper that don't represent anything. But maybe it was the
Just
colors that he
instance
had
of
access.
formalism.
Yeah, maybe it was the access to the colors that he had in the time period. Because if you changed whatever example of wallpaper he thought was formally beautiful to bright neon pink,
Right.
I'm guessing that he would no longer think it was as beautiful, even though the color is.
Nick Zengel has this thought experiment with the Maya Lin Memorial Vietnam War. Like, imagine exactly like that. Imagine it completely, like you said, pink, neon pink. It would destroy negative impact, the representational aspect of it. To me, it's strange that the idea that, okay, maybe this is misguided, but look at certain decorative patterns that are supposedly Iznik in Turkish Iznik. That's an elaborate combination of elements that are supposed to convey meaning, like the flowers of the Iznik. There are specific flowers combined in a certain way. Like it's not just random, and now some agreeable flower shapes thrown there. Otherwise, it's not Iznik. And whatever aesthetic effect it produces in you, it must be connected to that understanding of all that mingling of those all elements. And for instance, like the fact that the tulip is in full bloom as lowers the head, which is the Islamic, so submissive. I think so. All these little details play a role in what counts as.
But at one point he mentioned symbolic flowers.
Yeah.
But it's a bit different context than this. So thank you for the wonderful questions, especially for that 52 part.
Can I ask David a question? So David, something that I'm always interested in, and maybe this also goes back to your talk on Monday. So you had this wonderful towards the end when everything comes together in your theory. You kind of have this wonderful sentence where, on the view that you are presenting, art, if I understood you correctly, so art is helping us with conditions of knowledge more so than with the knowledge itself. And I think this is really wonderful, that this is in line with what people like John Gibson would call the indirect humanism, where the idea is that it's wrong to look at the art for factual information. What art really does is to help us expand, let's say, our conceptual repertoire, our manners of thinking, our capacity to engage cognitively with the world, etc. But I was wondering, within your theory, or within Collingwood's theory, I'm not sure how to differentiate these two, is there any space for talking about, and I'm going to employ the traditional epistemology, which may not work as we saw in our discussion on Monday, but if art gives us this access to perspectives, if art gives us the way in which to recognize certain elements of our experience that we were unaware of before, and if art which is good because it can do that, what happens when we have two opposite views on something? How do we, again, because I really don't know how to ask the question without bringing in the traditional epistemology, but how are we supposed to think about epistemically reliable artists from those who do have the technique, do have a very good way of showing you something, but that is in fact in some way wrong? Would that be a problem for Collingwood, or does the notion of epistemic reliability or correctness or appropriateness or truthfulness doesn't even apply? Or maybe for your...
It might apply in a different way. So, yeah, fortunately we have this image up on the screen, by coincidence. And Collingwood does have a line where he says that, like I'm paraphrasing very loosely, I forget the exact wording, but the people who are concerned with whether a portrait of someone, like how accurately it resembles the appearance of the person it's a portrait of, and they can't know if it's a good work of art, a good painting, until they know, like almost like how accurate, how photorealistic it was. That they don't really know anything about art, or they're not really judging it as a work of art. They're just judging it as a work of craft in that sense. So that would suggest that he wouldn't think the question of whether what is the sense that's expressed, or the psychical feeling in the very broad sense, like the what it's like of an experience that's expressed in a work of art. The question of whether that sort of corresponds to the actual thing that it's a work of art of, I don't know if you would think that that's the most relevant or interesting question. And so these caricatures up here, I liked them because it seemed like, and I had thought that they might be good examples, but obviously I didn't have them up in the talk, of how the way he uses the term psychical feeling is not an emotion, but it's more like the sense you get of something. So I would think that So I'm assuming that Amadeo knew these two people. The fact that he painted the guy on the left, or he did caricatures a few times in different ways. He was the guy with the foot, he was the guy with the other kind of creepy smile and the hooked hands and things. So he knew him. So I don't know if this is actually really the case with these drawings, but it seems plausible that he knew these people and he did these caricature sketches of them in exaggerated facial expressions to bring out something that he sensed about their personality or their character. And so that kind of sense, that's not an emotion. But I think that would count as what Collingwood would call a psychical feeling. That the feeling in a looser sense, the feeling I get from this person, my feeling for their character. And so these particular expressions, the smile and whatever that guy's doing, like shouting or calling out or laughing or something, might not have been anything that these people ever did, but Amadeo might have drawn them in this way because he thought that it was capturing or bringing out something that he sensed about their characters or their personality through knowing them. And this also might not have been something that Amadeo himself was sort of quite precisely sure about or could fully conceptualize until he tried drawing them in this way, until he tried sort of creating these expressions for them and sort of getting it right. And the final stage of the process of him getting it right, if I make this person look this way, this does sort of capture what I've sensed about them in some way, or it sort of speaks to some element of them. I think that would be how it might fit in Collingwood's expression theory, when it's not an emotion, or what we might commonly understand by the term feeling. But as to your question, whether it's, I don't know in the sense whether. So I think what Collingwood would say is that what matters is that Amadeo had this sense that this would sort of say something about or capture or reveal something about their character. But maybe he was wrong in that sense, in the sense, maybe he was wrong to think that, in the sense that, I'm trying to avoid using the word sense in two different ways. Maybe he was, his sense of that was wrong insofar as the real person's character who he knew isn't actually like what he thought. Maybe he was mistaken about their character. I don't know that would be a problem. So going back to exactly the question you were asking, because the kind of cognitive value that I'm saying the work can have isn't giving us accurate or true knowledge of the subject of the caricature's character. The goal isn't to know that this person really was like whatever this expression brings out. I think the cognitive value more comes from looking at this as, going back to my first talk, this is a coherent perspective. Even if this friend of Amadeo's didn't have this character, Amadeo was mistaken in that. Just looking at that, not even knowing who it's supposed to be or any of the background, we can see how this sort of captures or makes salient or makes manifest two particular characters that people could have. They're plausible. They're coherent in some way. We can sense that they fit together or they work. They are psychologically plausible in this way. And so I think that can still have the value of showing us what it's like to get something right in expression and working it out. And it doesn't so much matter whether the object or person that's represented really was like that, because how would we know, in a sense? How would we as viewers know looking at this?
So how can Collingwood or your theory account for the kind of question that I got yesterday? Sorry, I don't know her name.
Yeah.
But thank you, because your question was great. What happens when we obviously have if I remember correctly, great works of art, but where we recognize that there are things which are just plain wrong in them. How would you or Collingwood account for those instances? Or whether
Yeah,
it
whether-
still doesn't matter?
Is the wrongness that they're, I think your example from the question yesterday, like what's wrong is that they're factually incorrect, as opposed to whether they're, like I'm thinking in a narrative work, you might want to use the term, if they're dramatically plausible, if they're coherent and consistent, if they hang together in a way that all fits and comes together as a coherent whole. I think that is, so an element that doesn't fit together or makes a portrayal of a character in a fiction or an interaction not psychologically plausible, I think that would count as wrong or mistaken in the relevant way. And then you might get these cases where, maybe this goes into the like truth is stranger than fiction cliche, of cases where someone might, like say a dramatist or a novelist, someone trying to, who is someone who is writing a human interaction as part of their story. If they model it after a real interaction that happened, like what people actually said to each other, and so that's true to life in that sense, that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be like psychologically or dramatically credible as something consistent and coherent. And the defense from the artist that, or the writer, that, well, no, people do actually talk like this because this was maybe even taken from a transcript or something, like they recorded or filmed people and just replayed that. That wouldn't really be a good artistic defense of its artistic narrative coherence. Does that kind of make sense in line with what you were
Yeah,
saying?
I'm just wondering what to say about the works where the aesthetic and the cognitive element, however you understand them, come apart. And whether or not they necessary. Because for me, always the problem with when I'm listening to your idea about Collingwood is that it seems to me just like with Kant. But with Kant, it's very explicit. He basically states that, and I guess Collingwood doesn't. But there is always this idea that an artist, if he's really a true artist, can't get things wrong, and that just seems a bit too.
But it's a different sense, like a different question of what is being gotten wrong. So I guess for Collingwood, what matters that an artist gets right or wrong is the nature of their own experience or feeling or sense of the thing. So with Amadeo, if he actually had a sense that these people were, like their characters or personalities were like what he's portraying them as, what counts as getting it right in the artistic sense for Collingwood would be him sort of accurately and fully expressing the sense he had about them, about what they were like. It wouldn't be getting it wrong in the relevant sense for Collingwood if Amadeo's sense or judgment or feeling that these people were like that, if that was wrong or not. That's a different thing. I think that goes back to the question of where cognitive value lies. Is it in like something about the content that the work of art is depicting and the relation of the work's content, like its correspondence to something in reality outside of the work? Or does the cognitive value lie more in how the work is presenting or portraying what it's about, and whether everything in the work is internally consistent, not whether it sort of corresponds to something outside it, and that's not the criteria. And that goes back to what I said, Collingwood's remark about people who can't judge how artistically good a portrait is unless they know how well it resembles the person it's of. They don't know what they're not looking for the right thing. They're not
So
thinking
in the
about
first
it.
paradigm, the art would be, our criteria for judging art would be the same as our criteria for judging science, whereas on Collingwood's account and the one that you just presented, art really is a specific source of knowledge, and we are wrong when we try to measure it up by traditional epistemic/scientific standards.
Yeah, and so it is a source of, we could even call it a source of knowledge, in the sense that I said in the talk, I suspect a lot of people, especially a lot of the main people who are interested in art having cognitive value, would probably think of as too trivial, or that's not the sort of thing that they mean or that they want to count. But yeah, so I guess we have to assume that these caricatures are successful expressions on the part of Amadeo of a sense or feeling he had of these people and who they were. So if this is successfully expressing how he felt these people were, then that is all that matters for us to know. So getting a kind of knowledge from like engaging with and apprehending the portrait and getting what it's expressing, to know how he felt about these people. So we can know something about Amadeo's feeling. We're not gaining knowledge about the people. That's like expecting art to do something it shouldn't do. It's not reporting scientific truths about the world outside itself. If anything, it might be reporting something about how Amadeo felt. Yeah, we come to learn that. He might have become aware of it. He might have come to learn sort of exactly how he was seeing these people he was friends with by drawing them. And so that's a kind of knowledge.
I think there are other people, but just to conclude, so the cognitive value would be exhausted by our knowledge of what the artist actually felt, or it's not really knowledge about the world as such. It's just very narrow in the sense that I get to know what the artist meant.
I wasn't saying that exhausts the cognitive value.
Oh.
I was saying that might exhaust the kind of knowledge that we can get from the work. But that's still knowledge of the world, because Amadeo's in the world. His act of making the caricature, of drawing it, is in the world. It's not like the world is like the world that we can gain knowledge about is somehow only external to the work of art. Like everything is part of the world. But what I was saying is that, like, yes, that kind of cognitive value in the sense of gaining knowledge, I do think on Collingwood's account it's limited to knowledge of how someone felt or saw things or whatnot. But I was saying that that's not the only way that art can have cognitive value, that it has this possibly more important sense of cognitive value, and that's the Gibson thing that you, or it relates to what you said about Gibson. Yeah.
If we can follow up, I'm just wondering, what would you think about this? I think this caricature is not just how I understand this. It's not just a feeling, like Amadeo's feeling about them as individuals, but as a types.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have this in philosophical literature and also in literature. For example, the beginning of the 4th book of Idiots, Dostoevsky's Idiot, he said that it's, I remember this because it's rare in his books, those autopoetical observations, and he said that for one of the characters, well, this character is maybe exaggerated, but taken as a type, he is more real than reality itself. So, and you have something similar, well, it's not the same but similar, but Aristotle talks about basically the cognitive value of art, of tragedy. He said that poetry is more philosophical than history, because it's more general and it's more serious than history. So maybe can you take into account this fact that this expression or this feeling, this feeling can be some feeling about some more general things than
The feeling could be about the specifics.
should be about.
Sorry.
Okay.
I was just going to make this. I've been waiting to make this remark because you have this coherentist aspect to it. It coheres. It makes sense. But there's also a connection to the world by way of types. You see, how can none of us could possibly have experience of those individuals, but we get the picture.
Main
Why?
characters.
Because we have human experience. We can relate to human types that cohere with these. So it's not just the internal coherence, it's also coherence with the world. We recognize the type.
Exactly.
So here you have the two things coming together. So okay, maybe he was wrong about he could be wrong about the specific individuals, but he was right about something that again, like James Young says, the type of person who belittles the things he cannot obtain, like the fox and the grapes. So again, that's that dialectic of the general and the particular. The particular here is exactly the feeling.
Mhm.
And that's what you want to get through the artwork. Yeah. Not that, so what's the particular aspect to which you are supposed to be faithful in your thing? No, it's the likeness, the photorealist aspect. Is being right about those two individuals in particular. No, it's feeling, but it's feeling also. It's not just something self-contained outside of the world. It connects to the world through this portraying the type, not the, like I said, the aesthetic interest.
Especially caricatures.
Yeah, but even with caricatures, I mean,
With
they
exaggeration of
Right.
something with what is important.
yes, so they tend to go towards portraying people as types, more or less. But even any particular person who you could say fits a type or is a sort of a type of person, I guess no token or instance. Token sounds weird if you're talking about people. Any instance of that type is going to be in some way particular. There's going to be something different about it. Like no, not even just person, like no member of a type is completely generic. Maybe in sort of abstract types, like, but any empirical, like real world, living or concrete instance of a type is never going to be purely generic. There's always going to be something particular and specific about them.
And the relation is
Yeah.
maybe not genus and species, but determinabilia and determinata. You do know this distinction, so you cannot express what is the specific
Mhm.
for this specific
Right.
person, but you can perceive it somehow.
Yeah, and if this was, so I'm taking, like, assuming that these are artistically good caricatures, in Collingwood's sense of artistically good, like they're expressing something, then a viewer who looks at it and only recognizes the general type isn't seeing everything in the picture. It's like they're stopping at the point where they can label it or give a name to it. They're not looking at this particular drawing to see, even if they're right in some sense that it portrays this person as a kind of type. If they're just stopping at that, they're missing out on something, because there would be more that the caricature is doing than just presenting the type. Otherwise, a drawing or caricature or any sort of work of art, any representation of portrayal, that isn't doing anything more than merely portraying someone or something as a generic type, would be like just a pure cliche. It wouldn't be. I don't even know if you could have that. That seems like an extreme case. I think there would always be something unique or particular about any
Yes.
work, even if it's trying to be as sort of cliche as possible.
You have a question?
Yeah, yes. So thank you very much. I have two things that I'd like to say about this Hollywood's vision, if I correctly understood it. So the first thing is that this cognitive value of a piece of art, it seems that it depends only on correct interpretation of the artist's supposed expression taken by a certain subject, receptive type. But that receptive type should also have some kind of influence in determining how far does the cognitive value go. So what I mean is when two different subjects look at an artwork, they might have different interpretations of what the cognitive aspect of that work of art should be. So one of them might put the limits just on the straightforward and just perspective, giving this perspective on like the artist's intentions when creating the artwork, while the other one actually studied the biography of the artist itself and just knows a lot more contextual clues that give him another side of the cognitive value of the artwork. So I believe that in Collingwood's view, this is not being accounted for. So the difference in terms of the reception of different agents, because it seems that there's this cognitive value and it's true because it is consistent or it is cohesive with all the things that the artist wanted to express, but it doesn't take into consideration the difference in attitudes, in receptive attitudes. So I'm not saying that this is a fault of Collingwood's theory. I just don't think he cares about it. But I do believe that it should be taken into account because it seems to postulate the importance of a single cognitive value for each artwork. And a second and related question is this single cognitive value. I don't think it's that easy to pinpoint. Like I get to a case of caricature of someone that was close to the artist. And we see the elements that were exaggerated in order to make the caricature somewhat comprehensible. But in artworks where there are more than one author, like the main example is always a movie. Like there are so many different people working for the movie that even in the most author-like film, you can have so many different expressions and objects of expression trying to be put forward, that I don't think that objective cognitive value can actually be identified. So let's take a simple example of a movie. Like I was watching a performance, and the performance was actually directed by a director, and is the author, the main author, according to many school of thought. But the actor himself is actually doing that. If we go a little bit further, the cinematographer is always doing the guy with the lights and the soundtrack in the background. So there are so many different artistic elements that are being put together that I don't think that I think the expression of the artist kind of gets lost in the way in the way to actually identify some expressive element from a single person or a single expressive answer that could be given to the question, what is the value of a certain artwork in a certain context. So these are basically my two main thoughts. I don't know if they make any sense. I went too weird or
I don't know that it's a problem for works in art forms that have multiple people working on them, like films or operas or whatnot. Because I think, so definitely Collingwood's idea is not that we necessarily need to, I mean, it might help in some cases, but that we need to know who the artist is or biographical details or whatever to understand what they were expressing. That in a successful expression, it's also not going to be the sort of thing that anyone will just get instantly by looking at the work or hearing the work. So I think some knowledge, at least, not of the artist, but some knowledge of the medium and how the medium can be used that's probably necessary for someone to be able to look at or listen to or read a work of art in a certain medium and sort of grasp, okay, this seems like it's an expression, it seems like it's expressing this, it's using the elements of the medium to express this. Collingwood said something like the audience can see or they can get what the artist puts into the work because it was put into the work. So in some ways you should be able to apprehend the expression from the work itself. It's like in the work. You don't need to look at the details behind it. If it's a successful expression. But yeah, like you would need to sort of understand how to read, so to speak, read the medium and understand the medium. So with a film, I don't think you would need to know which member of the film crew made a certain creative decision. If you know enough about film as an art form, you would be able to sort of like grasp that a particular scene, okay, the elements are being used in a certain way. This is expressing something. This is sort of expressing a coherent feeling, whether it was the director or the cinematographer or whether the screenwriter came up with the idea. That's not so important. If it's a successful expression, it should be there in the work to be seen by a viewer who is an informed viewer with knowledge of the medium and who engages with it well enough and in certain ways. So that's a bit of a different issue, though, from what you also said about there being a single correct interpretation. So I do think, on Collingwood's view, that, yeah, art might only have cognitive value in the sense of giving us knowledge about how the person whose expression it is felt, or whoever is on the subject side of the expression might have felt about something. That art can only give that sort of cognitive knowledge, art can only give that sort of knowledge, or have that sort of cognitive value, the kind that I was calling more limited, if the audience member correctly grasps what it is the work is an expression of. And so another audience member who maybe interpreted the work differently in a way where they take it to be expressing something else, and then that's actually not what the work is expressing. They wouldn't gain knowledge from that.
Okay.
You might think that just the process of sort of engaging with the work and trying to investigate what is this expressing, there might be some cognitive benefit to just undertaking that process, even if it results. So that might be where hypothetical intentionalism could still have some kind of value as an exercise. It might be valuable to try to guess or hypothesize what whoever made the work was expressing by it, even if that turns out not to be what the artist was in fact expressing. Was there one other thing I wanted? Oh yeah, so that would put limits on how you could gain factual knowledge of what someone felt from a work. But I think that works of art and this process of engaging with works of art could still have the broader kind of cognitive value that I was saying, where they sort of give you practice in or help better your capacities for something, where the capacities are necessary for having knowledge outside of the work. Not even knowledge of the work, but knowledge of other things. So in that way, I think they could train you to be better epistemic agents. And maybe that's how this process of trying to engage with the work as an expression and figuring out what it expresses and looking at it in those ways. Maybe that is how it could, all other things being equal, help make someone a better epistemic agent in general by training them to pay close attention to detail, to attend to these kinds of things, and to recognize when things are fitting together coherently or when things are working and not. Yeah.
Thank you. Perfect.
More questions? Should we call it a day? Thank you so much.